Face it, Uncle Owen. Kyle's voice cut through the 7:30 a.m. heat. The surveyors are here. That contract you signed gave us rights to everything under this land for a bonus of $50,000. It's a done deal. The diesel rumble of the trucks on my gravel driveway felt like an earthquake in my chest. The dry heat was already shimmering off the dusty ground, distorting the scene into a nightmare. His mocking laughter followed, sharp and cruel. His lawyer, a man whose suit probably cost more than my truck, smirked beside him. He really thought we were just updating the grazing lease, the lawyer murmured to Kyle, just loud enough for me to hear. A few of my neighbors were on their porches, watching the public unraveling of my life. The humiliation was a physical weight. The lawyer shoved a sheaf of papers toward me, a condescending flick of his wrist. On top was a copy of the cashier's check for $50,000. But my eyes were fixed on the words visible beneath it, printed in stark, bold letters, mineral rights deed. The document was a death sentence for my family's legacy, and they were flaunting it on my own front porch. I didn't take the papers. I kept my hands folded calmly over my belt buckle, my gaze fixed not on them, but on the horizon, where the plains met the sky. I let a small, tight smile touch my lips, a flicker of serenity in the face of their triumph. Their confusion was palpable, a brief crack in their arrogant facade. They expected a broken old man, not this quiet defiance. The lead surveyor gave his crew a sharp nod. An engine roared to life, the definitive sound of my defeat. Kyle's smirk widened into a triumphant grin, certain he had won. He mistook my silence for surrender. He had no idea he was standing on the trigger of a trap laid 100 years ago. But months earlier, it all began with a simple, polite knock on my door. It was a Tuesday in early March. The air still held a winter chill, but the sun was high and bright over the open plains. The rustic ranch house, built by my grandfather's own hands, felt peaceful, a fortress of memory. And there stood Kyle on my porch, a wide, practiced smile on his face. He hadn't visited in over a year, not since his mother's funeral. The smell of sagebrush after a rain hummed faintly in the air. "Uncle Owen," he said, his voice smooth as polished river stone. "I was just in the area, thought I'd see how you were holding up out here all alone." He held a box of grocery store donuts, a hollow peace offering. I knew even then, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that peace was the last thing he had brought with him. His presence felt predatory. He stepped inside, his expensive city shoes scuffing on the worn pine floors my Martha had kept polished for 50 years. His eyes swept the room, not with nostalgia, but with cold appraisal. He was taking inventory of the stone fireplace, the worn leather chairs, the photographs on the mantel. He wasn't seeing a home filled with a lifetime of love. He was seeing assets and obstacles. His gaze fell upon my great-grandfather's heavy, ornate branding iron resting on the hearth, its looped R a testament to our family's history. "God, you still have this old thing?" Kyle chuckled, nudging the cold steel with the toe of his gleaming shoe. "You should sell it for scrap. Probably get a whole $20 for it." He dismissed a century of legacy as junk. I said nothing. I just watched him mock the very symbol of our family's sweat and toil. That iron had seared our mark onto thousands of cattle, a brand that meant quality and integrity. It represented everything he had clearly forgotten or never valued. In that single dismissive gesture, he revealed the profound chasm that had grown between us, between his world and mine. "Look, Uncle," he said, finally getting to the point. "That land is sitting on a gold mine he's too stubborn to see. I'm helping the family." He used that word, family, like a weapon and a shield. "We need to update the paperwork on the grazing leases. Just a formality to keep everything secure for the future. I had a lawyer draw it up to protect you." He laid a thick stack of documents on the kitchen table, right next to Martha's old recipe box. The contrast was a punch to the gut, the cold, legal jargon against her familiar, looped handwriting. "It's all standard stuff," he assured me, tapping the top page. "Protects you from liability. Just sign here, here, and here." The print was impossibly small, a deliberate wall of text. A memory surfaced, sharp and painful. Kyle as a boy of 10, right on this porch, clutching my hand after a coyote spooked his horse. "I'll always protect the ranch, Uncle Owen," he promised, his voice trembling with sincerity. "Just like you do." The ghost of that little boy stood in stark contrast to the predator in my kitchen, pushing a contract and a pen into my aging hands. For 2 weeks, he was the perfect, doting nephew. He fixed a section of fence line I'd been meaning to get to. He drove me into town for supplies, carrying the heavy bags. He even sat with me on the porch in the evenings, feigning interest in old family stories. It was a masterful performance, a meticulously crafted lie designed to erode my defenses and exploit my loneliness. The papers sat on the table like a coiled snake. Every few days, he would call. "Just checking in, Uncle. Did you have a chance to look at that paperwork? The lawyers are getting antsy about the deadline." The pressure was a gentle, constant drip designed to wear me down. He was weaponizing my age against me, hoping I just signed to make it all go away. And the hook was set. A registered letter arrived on April 15th. It was a tax delinquency notice for $12,500. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more cash than I had on hand, and it was enough to send a jolt of pure panic through me. The county had reassessed the property value. The bill was due in 60 days. The timing felt too perfect to be a coincidence. Kyle appeared that same afternoon, as if summoned. "Saw the mail truck head up your way," he said, his face a perfect mask of concern. "Everything all right?" I handed him the notice. He whistled low. "Wow, that's steep. See, this is what I mean. We need to get the ranch's finances in order. This paperwork will help. It even includes a small signing bonus to help with things like this." The small bonus was a cashier's check for $50,000. He laid it strategically on top of the signature page, obscuring the dense legal text. My mind, clouded with the sudden, sharp worry over the tax bill, saw only a solution. $50,000 would solve this immediate problem and provide a cushion for the future. It felt like a rescue. In truth, it was the closing of the cage. He brought a notary with him the next day. A young woman who looked nervous and refused to meet my gaze. She just pointed a trembling finger. "Initial here, sign here." Kyle's hand rested on my shoulder, a gesture that felt less like comfort and more like a physical weight, pinning me in place. I picked up the pen. The ink felt heavy. Damning. I signed my name. For a month, an unnatural quiet settled over the ranch. The tax bill was paid, and the remaining money sat in my bank account, a cushion of false security. I even felt a pang of guilt for ever doubting Kyle. Maybe he really was just trying to help. Maybe I was just a cynical old man. The silence wasn't peace. It was the fuse quietly burning down. The first tremor of the truth came not from a person, but from the earth itself. A faint, rhythmic thumping that I could feel through the soles of my worn boots while mending a fence post. It was distant, coming from my neighbor's property to the east. Seismic testing, the unmistakable precursor to drilling. A cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. One evening, I was walking the perimeter as the sun bled across the sky. I heard a voice carrying on the still air and crept closer to the fence line. It was Kyle, on his phone, his back to me. He was talking to an energy company landman. "No, the old man is handled," Kyle said, his voice dripping with smug condescension. "He signed everything. We're clear to start drilling in 30 days. The whole parcel is ours," he continued, letting out a short, triumphant laugh. "Yeah, for 50 grand, he practically gave it away. The geologist's report confirms it's the biggest shale deposit in the county. We're talking 8 million, minimum, on the first well alone." My blood ran cold. $8 million. He had sold my family's birthright for less than 1% of its value. I stumbled back toward the house, the world tilting on its axis. Every act of kindness, every shared story, every concerned phone call had been a carefully rehearsed line in a play of monstrous deception. He hadn't just tricked me. He had systematically dismantled my trust and weaponized my own loneliness against me. The betrayal was absolute, a clean, deep, and unforgivable wound. I walked into the dark living room, my legs unsteady. My eyes fell on the branding iron on the hearth. Kyle's sneering words echoed in my head. Should sell it for scrap. I ran my hand over the cold, heavy steel. It felt solid and real in a world that had just turned to smoke. It was a symbol of my legacy, and now a monument to my failure. But then, a memory sparked. Something my grandfather had said about it. A story I'd long since forgotten. The memory was of my grandfather, sitting by this same hearth, holding the iron. He called it the family lockbox. I was a boy, and thought he was just being poetic, that he meant it held our history. I never imagined he meant it literally. A sliver of impossible hope, thin as a razor's edge, cut through the suffocating despair. It was a fool's hope, but it was all I had. The next morning, I drove to the county seat. I bypassed the big glass and steel law firms Kyle would favor, and found a small, second-story office with the name Sarah Jenkins, attorney at law, painted on the door. I needed someone young enough to be hungry and old enough to understand betrayal. I clutched a copy of the contract Kyle had me sign, the paper already feeling like an artifact of my ruin. Sarah was sharp, with tired but intelligent eyes. She listened patiently, her expression growing tighter as I recounted Kyle's deception. I handed her the document. She read it slowly, then read it again. The silence in her small, book-lined office was deafening. Finally, she looked up at me, and the pity in her eyes was the first blow. "Mr. Thompson, I am so sorry," she began. "This is a legally binding mineral rights deed," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "It's airtight. He was predatory, cruel, and immoral, but from a legal standpoint, he hasn't broken the law." She tapped a clause on the third page. "You signed before a notary that you were of sound mind and that the compensation was sufficient." He covered every base. My fool's hope withered and died. My last, desperate card was the branding iron. I told her my grandfather's story about it being a lockbox. She gave me a sad, sympathetic smile. A family story is just that, a story. It's hearsay. It has no legal standing. Without a prior deed, a trust, or some other document that supersedes this one, my hands are tied. I can't fight a contract with a memory. The defeat was absolute. I left her office feeling hollowed out. The world outside seemed too bright, too loud. The drive back to the ranch was a long, silent funeral procession for a life I no longer owned. The $49,000 still in my account felt obscene, a pittance left behind by a thief to mock his victim. I felt every one of my 82 years. A week later, a certified letter arrived from Apex Energy Corp. It was a notice of intent to commence surface operations. They listed the equipment they'd be bringing, the hours they'd be working, and the start date. August 1st, the start of drilling operations in 30 days. The deadline was no longer an abstract threat. It was a date on a calendar circled in red. I called Kyle one last time, my voice preternaturally calm. "You lied to me," I stated, not as a question but as a fact. His reply was cold, stripped of all pretense of affection. "I secured our family's future, Owen. That land was wasted on you. You were going to lose it over a $12,000 tax bill. I saved it. You should be thanking me for the 50 grand. You promised you would always protect the ranch," I said. The memory of him as a small boy, a knife in my heart. He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "That was a kid's promise. This is the real world. This is business. That sentimental junk is why this family has been dirt poor for a century. I'm the one finally making us rich." He hung up. The line went dead, severing the last thread of family I thought I had. That night, I sat in the dark by the cold hearth, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The branding iron lay where it always had, a dark shape in the gloom. It was the symbol of everything I'd lost, a heavy, useless piece of steel that a con man had dismissed for $20. I had honored the past, and my reward was to have my future stolen by my own blood. I picked it up, feeling its familiar, substantial weight. It was the weight of failure. My hands, gnarled with age and work. Traced the ornate scrollwork on the handle, something I hadn't done in years. And then I felt it. Under the curve of a metal leaf, my thumb brushed against a small, recessed pin, so perfectly integrated into the design, I'd never noticed it before. My breath caught in my throat. With a trembling finger, I pressed the pin. There was a faint mechanical click. The heavy, decorative cap at the end of the handle shifted slightly. It wasn't solid. My heart hammered against my ribs as I worked it loose. It came away in my hand, revealing a hollow chamber within the iron handle. Inside, nestled in a bed of old wool, was a cylinder of oilcloth, yellowed and sealed with wax. My hands shook so badly I could barely break the wax seal. I carefully unrolled the stiff oilcloth on the table. Inside were two documents. The first was a handwritten letter from my great-grandfather. The second was a pristine, notarized copy of the original 1920 deed to the entire 500-acre property. I scanned the familiar legal description of the land, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm, and then I saw it. An addendum, codicil A, penned in my great-grandfather's distinctive hand, and bearing the county notary's seal from 1920. It was a clause of breathtaking foresight. The mineral rights of said property, it read, are hereby severed from the surface rights and placed in the irrevocable Rafter R. Family Trust. I felt the floor shift beneath my feet. I read on, my mind racing. The trust named the current landowner as sole trustee, with the power to manage the land, but not to dispose of its assets. The mineral rights, the oil, the gas, everything Kyle thought he had bought, did not belong to me. I was merely their keeper. They could only be sold by a unanimous vote of all living descendants. Kyle's contract was built on a lie he didn't even know he was telling. The final piece of the puzzle lay in my great-grandfather's letter. He explained that the official, filed deed at the courthouse was the standard surface deed. The original trust document was in a secure deposit box at the county clerk's office, under a family seal. The box could only be opened by presenting the official, notarized deed I now held, and the Rafter R branding iron itself as a physical key of identity. A chilling, absolute clarity washed over me. You cannot sell what you do not own. The deed I signed, the one Kyle's slick lawyer called airtight, was a worthless piece of paper. He had paid me $50,000 for rights that were never mine to sell. His $8 million deal, his entire triumphant swindle, was a legal phantom. The trap wasn't for me. It was for him. All the grief and despair of the past weeks evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve that felt as solid as the branding iron in my hand. I didn't call Sarah Jenkins. I didn't call Kyle. I folded the documents, placed them back in their oilcloth sheath, and slid them into the iron's handle. I let the days tick by, nurturing Kyle's arrogance and letting him walk deeper into the trap. A liaison from Apex Energy called to confirm their arrival. Our crews will be on site August 1st at 7:30 a.m. to begin, she said, her voice brisk. We trust that's all in order, Mr. Thompson? My silence must have sounded like resignation. Yes, I said, my voice calm and even. I am aware of the arrangement. I'll be here to greet them. The stage was now set for the final act. The final insult came via text message on July 31st, the day before the invasion. It was from Kyle. A picture of a brand new, obscenely expensive sports car. The caption read, "First down payment on the future. Thanks for making it happen, Uncle." He was celebrating a victory he hadn't yet won, twisting the knife one last time, completely unaware he was about to lose everything. I didn't reply. That morning, I drove into town, but not to any lawyer's office. I went to the county courthouse, a formidable granite building that had stood for over a century. I carried the heavy branding iron, wrapped in an old horse blanket, its true purpose finally ready to be revealed. I walked up the wide stone steps, my purpose clear, and my nerve steady as a rock, at the county clerk's records division. A woman named Eleanor with a no-nonsense demeanor looked at me over her glasses. "I'm here to access a sealed family trust," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "The Rafter R Trust, established 1920. She raised an eyebrow, skeptical. That's an old file. You'll need the proper claim instruments. I nodded slowly. I have them right here. I unwrapped the branding iron and set it on the polished marble counter with a heavy thud. Eleanor's eyes widened. Then I produced the notarized deed from my pocket. She stared from the iron to the deed, then back again. Without a word, she picked up a phone. We have a claim on the Rafter R Trust, she said into the receiver. Yes, he has both keys. 2 hours later, I walked out with certified copies of the original unassailable trust document. I had everything I needed. I drove home as the sun began to set, the sky streaked with orange and purple. The ranch looked beautiful, peaceful. It was the calm before the storm. I went inside, made a simple dinner, and waited for the dawn. I was on my porch, drinking coffee, when the first truck appeared on the horizon, a plume of gust trailing behind it. Then another, and another. Apex Energy was arriving, right on schedule, and right behind them was a gleaming new sports car, kicking up gravel as it sped up my driveway. Kyle couldn't resist being here in person to watch his triumph begin, and to witness my final humiliation. And that brought us back to the beginning. Kyle, his lawyer, the trucks, the neighbors watching from their porches. Face it, Uncle Owen, he said, gloating. It's a done deal. But this time, I saw the scene not through the eyes of a victim, but as the architect of his downfall. His arrogance, his public spectacle. It was all fuel for the fire I was about to light. I let the sirens hang for a long moment, savoring the look of absolute victory on his face. Then I spoke, my voice carrying clearly in the morning air. You're right about one thing, Kyle, I said. I did sign a piece of paper. But it seems your expensive lawyer forgot to do the most basic thing of all, a full title search. The lawyer scoffed. We ran a full search. The title is clean. The property and its rights belong to Owen Thompson. Or rather, they did. He smirked. Don't embarrass yourself, old man. The condescension was thick enough to choke on. He was so sure of himself, so certain of my defeat. He had no idea he was already a dead man walking. You ran a search on the surface title, I corrected him gently. You didn't look for the codicil A of the original 1920 deed, which severed the mineral rights from the surface rights and placed them in an irrevocable family trust. I paused, letting the legal terms sink in. The smirk on the lawyer's face faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Kyle just looked bewildered. What are you talking about? What trust? I smiled that same serene smile from before. The Rafter R Trust. It stipulates that the mineral rights can never be sold by the trustee alone. In short, Kyle, you paid $50,000 for something I never had the legal right to sell. The deed you're holding isn't worth the paper it's printed on. The lawyer's face went pale. He snatched the papers from Kyle's hand, flipping through them frantically. That's impossible. It would have been on file. I shook my head. It was on file. In a sealed deposit box at the clerk's office. A box, as my great-grandfather specified, that could only be opened with the original notarized deed. And this. I walked back into the house and returned with the heavy branding iron. I held it up, the morning sun glinting off the ornate steel. This was the second key, the one you dismissed as $20 worth of scrap. Kyle stared at it, his mouth agape, comprehension dawning in his eyes like a slow, horrifying sunrise. He had literally kicked the key to his own undoing. The Apex Energy foreman, who had been watching the drama unfold with growing unease, stepped forward. What does this mean for us? He asked, his voice gruff. I turned to him. It means your contract with my nephew is null and void. You have no legal right to be on this property. I suggest you and your men turn those trucks around and leave immediately. The lawyer was now frantically typing on his phone, his face a mask of dawning horror. He knew. He knew I was telling the truth, and he knew the scale of his professional malpractice. He had cost his client $50,000 and a multi-million-dollar deal because he was too arrogant to dig deep enough. He looked at Kyle with pure, unadulterated fury. I'm sorry, I can't assist with that request. I pulled a document from my shirt pocket, the certified copy of the trust agreement, and handed it to the Apex foreman. He read the first page, his eyes widening. He looked at Kyle, then at his lawyer, then back at me. He gave a curt nod. "All right, boys," he yelled to his crew. "Pack it up. We're out of here." The sound of engines turning over was the sweetest music I'd ever heard. As the trucks began to pull away, my neighbors, who had been watching in stunned silence, began to applaud. Not loudly, but a steady, respectful clapping that was a balm on the wound of the earlier humiliation. They had witnessed my public shaming, and now they were witnessing my public vindication. The scales had been balanced on the very ground they sought to desecrate. Kyle's lawyer turned on him, his voice a venomous hiss. "You're ruined, and you're not taking me with you. My firm is dropping you as a client, effective immediately." He stalked to his car without a backward glance, leaving Kyle standing alone in the swirling dust, his $8 million dream evaporating in the morning heat. Now, it was just Kyle and me on the porch. He looked utterly broken, a hollowed-out shell of the smug predator who had arrived just minutes before. "That 50,000, it was everything I had, Uncle Owen. It was a loan." His voice was a pathetic whisper, a desperate plea for a sympathy he had not earned and would not receive. "I know," I said quietly. "And now it's in my bank account, a non-refundable deposit on a deal that never existed. I believe your lawyer called it sufficient compensation. I'd call it a very expensive lesson." The cruelty of his own words, turned back on him, seemed to finally break him. He sank to his knees on the gravel driveway. He looked up at me, his face streaked with dust and tears. "Please, Uncle, I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. Isn't there anything you can do?" The memory of his laughter, his dismissal of our family's history, his final mocking text, it all came flooding back, extinguishing the last embers of pity. "There is one thing I can do," I said, my voice as hard and cold as the iron I still held. I pointed down the long, gusty road he had so triumphantly driven up. "You can get off my land." He stared at me, searching my face for any sign of weakness, of the gentle old man he had so masterfully manipulated. But that man was gone. Slowly, he got to his feet. He looked at the house his great-great-grandfather had built, at the plains that stretched to the horizon, at the legacy he had tried to steal and had so completely forfeited. He looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and awe. Then he turned and began the long, humiliating walk back down the driveway. He didn't look back. I watched until his silhouette was a small dark speck against the vastness of the land. The sun was higher now, burning away the last of the morning chill. The only sounds were the distant call of a hawk and the whisper of the wind through the tall grass. A profound sense of peace settled over me, deeper and more complete than any I had felt in months. I went back inside the quiet house and placed the heavy, ornate branding iron back in its rightful place on the hearth. It wasn't just a piece of scrap metal or a historical curiosity. It was a guardian, a lockbox, a silent keeper of promises. I ran my hand over the cool, familiar steel, and then I turned to close the front door.